She was 34 years old when she sat in a psychiatrist's office and heard the 4 words that retroactively changed the meaning of her entire childhood. "You have ADHD, actually." For 20 years, she had cycled through treatments that never quite reached the root of the problem. 4 different antidepressants, years of therapy for anxiety, and dozens of specialists who never thought to look past her surface symptoms. Her therapists called her a perfectionist. Her mother labeled her lazy and dramatic. Her marriage reached a breaking point because, while she could manage a high-stakes career, she consistently forgot to pay the household bills. Every one of those struggles was the result of untreated ADHD, and despite 20 years of seeking help, not one professional had ever suspected it. When women seek help for ADHD symptoms, they are frequently misdiagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, depression, or borderline personality traits. These secondary conditions are often just the visible outputs of an untreated core engine. The underlying ADHD creates a neurochemical cascade that manifests as anxiety or depression. Standard treatments like SSRIs or meditation can block those secondary valves, but the central engine remains active. Without addressing the executive dysfunction at the source, the system eventually overflows and ruptures. If you are a woman in your 30s, 40s, or 50s who has spent decades feeling like something is wrong that no one can name, you may recognize your own history in these specific mechanics. This feeling of being broken is rarely a personal failure. It is the natural consequence of applying the wrong medical solutions to a brain that works differently than you were told. Until the mid-2010s, ADHD was treated as a condition that primarily affected boys. For every 1 girl diagnosed as a child, 3 or 4 boys received an evaluation. This gap has no basis in neurology. Girls have ADHD at nearly identical rates to boys, but their symptoms were historically invisible to the medical community. The diagnostic criteria used for decades were derived almost entirely from studies of hyperactive elementary school boys. To get a diagnosis, a child usually had to display disruptive external behaviors. They had to run around classrooms, leave their seats, or blurt out answers, actions that teachers easily notice and refer for evaluation. ADHD in girls rarely looks like a disruption. Instead, they daydream, lose their belongings, and overthink their social interactions. They were often dismissed as spacey or too sensitive, rather than being evaluated for a neurological disorder. Because their symptoms didn't match the textbook archetype, these women were ignored through every stage of their education and into their adult careers. To survive, these women develop exhausting camouflage. Girls are socialized to be quiet and attentive, so they learn to perform having it together, while their internal experience is one of chaos. This masking burns significantly more energy than unmasked living, leading to a state of permanent fatigue. This perfectionism functions as a survival response, an attempt to overcompensate for a working memory that refuses to be consistent. You might rewrite a single email 6 times, or spend hours researching a simple task because you do not trust your own brain to get it right. Many also live with rejection-sensitive dysphoria, where perceived criticism feels like physical pain. To avoid this, they become chronic people-pleasers, saying yes to every commitment and absorbing the emotions of everyone around them to stay safe. On the outside, this woman appears highly successful. She has the degrees and the job title, but the internal cost is a cycle of weekly collapse. She works twice as hard as her peers just to stay level and spends every weekend in a state of total recovery. Even her hobbies reflect this neurochemistry. She might become intensely obsessed with a new project for 2 weeks, only to lose interest the moment the novelty wears off. She calls herself flaky, but she is actually just responding to her brain's need for dopamine. These survival responses are often praised as ambition or agreeableness, which further hides the disorder beneath the surface. This neurological difference also affects emotional regulation. While a neurotypical brain can modulate emotional input, an ADHD brain often experiences emotional flooding, where a minor critical comment can ruin an entire day. Instead of seeing this as a biological feature, society labels these women as too dramatic or oversensitive, forcing them to take on even more shame for a reaction they cannot control. When you consider the energy spent on masking and emotional regulation, these women are working significantly harder than their peers just to function. The exhaustion they feel is clinical, not a lack of effort. Every character flaw these women have hated themselves for is actually a documented symptom. The shame they carried was based on a misunderstanding of their own biology. A woman receiving this diagnosis often weeps for hours, finally mourning the version of herself who spent 30 years believing she was simply broken. If you recognize these patterns, you are part of a massive movement of women finally being seen. Seek out specialists who use assessment tools specifically designed for adult women, and don't settle for providers who rely on outdated checklists. The labels of lazy, dramatic, or sensitive were never true. They were simply the wrong names for a brain that works differently. You were never broken. You were just missed.